Hello, y'all. Welcome back to Colonial Outcast. This is kind of an operational breakdown episode because late Sunday night, last night, being recorded on Monday, May 27th, Israel carried out an airstrike on a refugee camp in southwest Gaza, which has led to the death of at least 45 Palestinians, with at least 3x that in wounded, producing graphic images of non-contained tent fires and literally a decapitated toddler. So the tent encampment was set alight, it being designated to house internally displaced Palestinian civilians. This is a developing situation. I'm going to add some video to the screen right now. Israel has claimed responsibility for a strike in this area, which is based on obvious battle damage assessments, twisted rebar, shattered concrete, splintered metal, the cause of this destruction. The IDF is, of course, looking into it. This is separate from an event that happened earlier Sunday, Hamas shooting rockets out of Gaza into central Israel. 8 rockets reportedly shot out of southern Gaza, East Rafah, in a separate location from the camp. Still waiting for confirmation on where those rockets were actually shot from, but it is a separate incident, at least militarily, from the refugee airstrike. More on that in a bit. The strike took place in the Tel al-Sultan refugee camp in West Rafah. So just to be clear, the Tel al-Sultan neighborhood is not part of the IDF's new designated safe zone, which by now we know doesn't exist and can't accommodate all the million-plus displaced Palestinians. But this neighborhood also wasn't on the evacuation list. The area where the strike took place was actually a designated safe zone as of 2 weeks ago. More on that as well. So the IDF says they are aware of a fire that was started because of this strike, and several civilians were harmed. The incident is under review. They assert that the targets of this strike were 2 senior Hamas commanders. Let me remove that from stage. 2 senior Hamas commanders responsible for organizing resistance efforts in West Bank. We'll also get into that because it makes no sense that West Bank operations would be coordinated through Gaza as opposed to Jordan or Syria. So that's dumb on a very profound level. So Hamas says they hold the U.S. president and administration fully responsible for this massacre. The PA, Palestinian Authority, accuses the Israelis of deliberately targeting the tents. Israel will investigate. The U.S. will say they're waiting for the results of that investigation and that all civilian deaths are bad. You know, enter whatever pious statement they want. Also, the Knesset is set to vote to designate UNRWA as a terrorist organization, and the Egyptian and Israeli forces exchanged gunfire at the Rafah border crossing earlier this morning. 1 person is killed, potentially 3. There's a gag order on it. We'll talk about that at the end of the episode. So a lot going on. So the strike on the camp and safe zone protocol. So if you all remember, there's a ICJ order that recently passed in the World Court to halt operations in Rafah, and they're just going ahead. It looks like they're doubling down. Benjamin Netanyahu has said really reasonable things like, if the world's against us, we'll go at it alone. Israel will stand alone and defeat Hamas, which we know is at this point not going to happen. So I think, Alina, you were talking about this earlier, how this looked like a retaliation strike for Hamas shooting at Tel Aviv in some ways.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it looks like a revenge strike. I mean, within 24 hours prior to that, so we had the rockets firing from Gaza into Tel Aviv, which obviously undermines the narrative as well that Hamas has been defeated and these are the last few battalions in the south of Rafah, in the south, sorry, of Gaza. And then on top of that, beyond the fact that you had the Tel Aviv attacks, let's say, then there was the aspect as well that they took the Israeli officer as a hostage, which if we saw some of the videos that came out of Ben Gvir, he was literally screaming in despair. I don't know if you saw that video as to the apparent humiliation. So, I mean, this was a retaliatory attack for the Tel Aviv attacks, the hostage taking, but also then sending a message to the international community, the ICJ, that we're Israel, we'll do whatever we want.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. Like, Travis, you saw the hostage, the apparent. We don't have a proof of life yet, but it appears that there was a hostage taken in an action in the tunnels beneath Jabalia camp, and potentially one, maybe more soldiers were taken hostage. Again, we don't have a proof of life video, but I think there's an element of this, like creating atrocities to cover up deeper humiliations, potentially.
Oh, I think you two are completely correct, especially because I was looking at the strikes on the camp, on the refugee camp, and trying to understand like what tactical scenario, what strategic, like tactical objective, strategic objective, operational objective could this possibly mean? And I always run into trouble when I do that, because this is a military that does not make sane decision making according to normal military thought processes. But your point about it being a retaliatory strike now that makes complete sense. We're just going to hit you back, period. So I'm sure they, went looking for an excuse and hit that site. That makes a lot of sense. To the hostage capture, the optics of that are so bad for them, because one thing that has consistently taken damage over the course of this entire, the current version of this conflict is the damage to the IDF's illusion of being a superior military force, very high capability military force, the high capability of their intelligence organizations, right? And all of these myths have taken severe damage, and getting your own special forces dragged down a tunnel as they're captured by Hamas, fighters. As Greg likes to say, you're getting dragged down a tunnel by an army of orphans. That puts lie immediately to your military capability. Like, you're just not scary to me anymore. So, yeah, big deal.
Yeah. And one more thing about, like, there's some dispute on the interweb space about how do you know they were soft? It's like, okay, well, 1 second. And
one easy question is, are they carrying the same weapons as your line troops? And if the answer is no, then it's like they're not line troops. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I posted this on Twitter. If you're looking on the screen, we've got suppressed rifles, and actually they're not rifles; they're submachine guns.
I was going to say those don't look like rifles to me. Yeah.
No, they're Czech CZ submachine guns.
They look like pistol magazines. So they're like 9mm or something.
Yeah, no, these are 9mm. So they're made for fighting on ships and ship corridors and tunnels. And then they're suppressed, and they have dual nods. These are obviously special operations forces, and that's incredibly embarrassing. So there was the outrage against the rocket attack in Rafah, and the sheer ignominy of having your special operations forces captured by he was literally being dragged by a guy in sandals. Yeah. So
the rocket attack's the same thing too, right? The rocket attack proves the lie. Puts the lie to the statement of, oh, you cleared the rest of Gaza except Rafah, and that's just that you're finishing it off. Well, they just launched, and these aren't small things. Setting up the rockets that they're firing, and into Tel Aviv and stuff like that. That's not an easy thing to hide. It's not an easy thing logistically. It's not an easy attack logistically to execute. So you clearly don't control these zones. You don't control them at all. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pseudo power move. It's to aesthetically look as if they're achieving something, but also to appease their own public. It's incredibly pathetic. It's very juvenile. It's as though you're dealing with a narcissist who his ego can't take the fact, for example, he or she can't take the fact that you managed to undermine them, so they'll strike back even harder, but not actually achieving anything. It's aesthetic.
Yeah, right. And so the Israeli Defense Force, the way it communicates with its people is mostly through, social media. So we're going to pull up a Twitter post. If you're just listening, I'll read it out. So this was from 3 hours ago. Last night, the Israeli Air Force carried out an intelligence-based precise strike at a targeted senior Hamas terrorists in Tal al-Sultan neighborhood, which is in the southwest. Contrary to Hamas's lies and misinformation, the strike did not take place in the al-Mawasi humanitarian area. This is where the strike took place. First of all, Hamas never said the strike took place in al-Mawasi. It was always being reported as Tal al-Sultan. That was from like 30 seconds after the initial video got posted onto social media. So first of all, if you look at the screen, there's Al-Mawasi by the coast. It's a small Bedouin neighborhood that cannot accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. So the location of the strike was in Tal al-Sultan, outside of the designated humanitarian area, which has only existed for a few days now, because as people who track the IDF accounts and try to hold them accountable posted, we've got the strike took place in, and I verified this independently, in gridlock. In section 2371, which is part of the northern part of Tal al Sultan neighborhood. It's outside of the quote unquote safe zone, but 2373 was also supposed to be a safe area, 2360. And again, during the monologue, I said that, you know, this wasn't part of their safe zone. Of course, no safe zones exist. It's all just a BS talking point made to obscure what's actually going on the ground. But they were actually never told to evacuate from this location. So, and then we have posts from, May 6th saying, IDF announces the expansion of the humanitarian zone at Al-Mawasi from now on, block 2371. Again, that's where the strike happened, in the south and east of the center of the city of Khan Yunis, is shown on the attached map. So, yes, technically it wasn't part of their aid their aid section, but it was where they were told to go to as well. So they're trying to walk that back. At this point, if anyone believes the IDF and their whole narrative about evacuations is, well, you're being willfully blind, I would say. But I don't know how much we want to talk about it, because at this point, it's just moot.
It's besides the point anyway.
Yeah.
It's besides the point. I mean, from the moment you're targeting tented refugee camps, there's really no excuse under international law. You cannot legitimize it by saying, "Oh, well, we told you to go a little further back." You are able. I mean, these are supposed to be target orientated attacks. They're very well aware as to what they're targeting, and they're very well aware that those were tented refugee camps. Therefore, there's absolutely no excuse. They knew they were going to target civilian population, and that's what they targeted, and those are the people that they killed. It's really
You're right. They continually use this argument, right? This is the same thing as the human shields argument. So just because a site's being used for dual use things, or even hypothetically there were operatives of some high level there, that doesn't forgive you of all requirements to reduce collateral damage and not slaughter tons of civilians on the ground with that strike. It doesn't absolve you of any of that humanitarian requirement as a military person. It doesn't absolve you of any of that. So it's been a BS lie the whole time. Maybe there was a university there. Right, they needed to knock down the last one potentially. So maybe there's like a hidden university that they needed to collapse to finish the job.
But they said that there was 2 Hamas leaders or something, like 2 Hamas senior officials or something like that, and then they wounded over 300 people.
Yeah, exactly.
Somewhere between 30 and 50. So for 2 military or individual members, you kill 30, 50 people and wound something like 300 people. I mean, that means you are militarily incompetent and have no idea how to execute a military operation. If to target the individuals that you need to target is absolutely ridiculous. It's inexcusable.
No, absolutely.
Fit into the context of law.
Any reasonable planner or any reasonable military would have looked at that and said, okay, if we want to go after those targets, we have to do it with dismounted soldiers, with some kind of small strike team or something like that. No one would look at that situation and go, what's acceptable here? Using large yield munitions in an open air tent camp. Like, no, that's absolutely insane by anyone's measurement, by NATO standards, by any military standards. Like, well, minus a couple countries, but yeah, that's just wildly unacceptable. It does. The presence of anything does not absolve you of the requirement to protect civilian life. Period. It never does.
Yeah, and I think it was wasn't it Magazine 927 that had published a piece, was a couple of months back, about how they have AI capabilities and basically they're able to count, and they're very aware where they hit how many people they're actually going to hit. This came out of an obviously Israeli media outlet. So again, they're very well aware as to the degree of damage that they're imposing. They just simply do not care.
Oh, it looked to us like they were it's looked to us so far like they were using that AI model to target population density.
Right. No, because after the article came out about them using what they call the gospel AI targeting system, they also have one called Lavender that uses Where's Daddy protocol, where the targeting data waits for people to go to their bed down location before they hit them. But there's the gospel, which is different from Lavender, that targets in a different way, that targets most likely centers of Hamas capability and stuff. So it's all BS, because we dropped a heat map of the population of Gaza and overlaid it with a heat map of where the strikes were occurring. It's the exact same thing. So it's not a sophisticated AI at all. I just think they're, from the beginning, just targeting population heat sectors. So when it comes to who they're saying they targeted, though, this is coming, the official Israeli Defense Forces statement: eliminated in the precise airstrike in northwest Rafah, Hamas chief of staff in Judea and Samaria, and an additional senior Hamas official. The first one, they say terrorist number 1, Yassin Rabia. Rabia managed the entirety of Hamas's terrorist activity in Judea and Samaria. He also carried out numerous attacks, yada, yada. They don't give any specifics. They don't provide any pictures. Terrorist 2, Khaled Nagar, also seems like a deputy at what they assert. Let's see. He transferred funds intended for Hamas's terrorist activities in Gaza. Perhaps he had a financier position. He also carried out several deadly terrorist attacks in which IDF soldiers were killed. I mean, first of all, there haven't been many of those in West Bank.
Well, can I just point something out here that's ridiculous on its face? When you attack uniformed military, or you attack military personnel, it's not a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how you do it. If you suicide bomb a military checkpoint, that is not a terrorist attack.
Yeah, because military personnel are considered to be legitimate targets under international law. It's only civilian populations that are considered to be obviously illegitimate attacks, and that's a terrorist attack in itself. But you know.
Oh, you know what? I think I was so pissed last night. I responded to the IDF. I said, "You never provide any SSE, which is sensitive site exploitation data, which is like photographs you recover, evidence based off the bodies after you do a battle damage assessment. You provide detailed information of like who the individual was. So, because when you do a controversial operation, like take one that everybody knows about, like going into Pakistan, U.S. Special Operations Forces going into Pakistan, into another sovereign country and visibly killing someone in that country, Osama bin Laden, we had to be like, okay, here's bin Laden's photograph, time stamped, location stamped, and we put that out to the world to be like, hey, this is why we did this, and this is our justification for it. There's no like, trust me, bro. And it's just like when we killed Baghdadi in Syria, I believe, the Islamic State guy, if you're not tracking, we also provided SSE for that. So I was like, yeah, you never provide any site exploitation data. You make up names and biographics and provide no photographs or testimony. We don't believe you. You're terrible at information operations. And then I posted the video of the child who no longer has a head. So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing about the Israeli Defense Forces. They've never substantiated any of their quote-unquote confirmed kills of senior Hamas officials. Like, we know they got a guy in Lebanon, a couple guys in Syria, but, like, what's actually happening in the Gaza Strip? They provide no targeting data. So it's just completely unbelievable with everything they say. And also the fact that you would have guys coordinating, the senior commanders for coordinating operations in West Bank, in Gaza, in a refugee camp, in a tent where there's an entire fleet of drones monitoring VHF and radio traffic. It makes no sense that they'd be in Gaza. They'd be, as I said, in Jordan or Syria to coordinate those operations. Am I completely insane for saying that?
Or elsewhere in Gaza? The last place they would be is in the most concentrated, focused on a position in all of Gaza right now, right? Like they might even like the north, the center, other tunnel areas, stuff like that. Any place, but a tent camp.
They're going to be very well concealed. They're going to be very well concealed. They're not going to be in anywhere, any particular location that's going to expose them. And furthermore, anyway, again, like Greg said, there's no way to verify any of the things that they stated. But most significantly, okay, let's just say these people are the people you say they are. Okay, you killed them alongside 300 other people you've injured, etc. What is that going to actually achieve militarily in the Gaza Strip? Or anywhere for that matter? What is it going to do? What is it help Israel accomplish?
Zero effect if it was true even.
Well, by now they must know that if they blow up a refugee camp, the world's going to know about it. So it's like, what's the cost benefit analysis? Okay, you take out two guys who are coordinating operations in West Bank, and West Bank is not hot right now. The IDF is not taking a lot of heat in terms of insurgent activity. So get rid of those guys and then just make another massive international incident? Like what did they hope to gain? It's just very irrational.
And the other aspect behind that is that, I mean, okay, let's just say these are the individuals that are coordinating. Again, we have no way of verifying that. Do they really think there aren't individuals ready to take on the reins if these people are killed? Obviously, this is a sophisticated sort of military structure that they have. Okay, if one person who's in the front lines goes down, we have somebody else who also knows sort of the layout. This is the plan. This is the activity. This is what we're going to be engaging in. And I'm not even some sort of military expert. This is where you guys come in. And even for me, from a common sense perspective, it doesn't achieve anything at all.
No, you're correct. You're correct. Even in with conventional militaries, but even more so with an organization like Hamas, right? Because this is a relatively decentralized operationally, guerrilla force that they tend to, they have to operate in cells for their own survival. For their own survival, they can't use a rigidly hierarchical system. To your point, even more so than a normal conventional military, even more so can they adapt on the fly to a leader being taken out. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm also resistant. Again, so resistant to the idea that they'd be coordinating operations out of Gaza.
I don't buy it
at all.
Not for a second. Yeah.
No, I mean, they have a large presence in Jordan and Syria and Lebanon as well. Why would you operate? The most heavily surveilled area currently on the planet. It just it doesn't really fly. So the strike. It's just there's too many plot holes, man, for me to believe the storyline.
And did you see, just to, like a little side note, did you see that the Royal Air Force from Cyprus was basically had taken off and they were monitoring the entire particular area of Rafah during that particular strike? That has been like a big topic of conversation now in the UK and here as well, because it means obviously they have intelligence information that they gathered because they were there at exactly the same time that the strike had happened.
Yeah. Wait, so in case y'all aren't tracking, Alina's in Cyprus right now, and one of the big contention points about people in Cyprus is they want the UK base to get out of there because it's still a legacy of colonialism and stuff. But they have British air assets flying surveillance and doing intelligence surveillance reconnaissance operations over Gaza. So the UK, and therefore by extension the US, knows exactly what's happening on the ground. They have targeting data. We're probably
apparently this has been going on the whole time. Apparently, like the leaked information involves like 200 plus surveillance sorties over Gaza throughout the prosecution of this thing. So maybe not specific to
hours.
Yeah. So they've been doing it. They've been doing it consistently. Yeah. Interesting. I wouldn't aware that either.
Not only that, but like, they are most likely collecting on their VH traffic too, like what's actually being said on the radios and their comms, not just targeting data as well. So I think it's kind of insane to posit that the US doesn't, and the UK and Western governments don't know exactly what's going on. They don't know Israeli targeting procedures because like who don't have access are able to intuit that based off of just open source reporting. So
the information that they were using dumb unguided munitions at a 50 to 55% level, that came from ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. US-based intelligence, right? They're the ones that accidentally leaked that
in December.
Yeah,
in December.
So they knew. Yeah, they've known the whole time. Clearly.
Yeah. But this is all part of what Israel does. I keep bringing this up, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we continually have new subscribers. So there's this pillar of Israeli military doctrine. Doctrine's kind of like a standard operating procedure that the entire military, for the purposes of planning and conducting operations, adopts. So it's across the board. It's called the Da'iyah Doctrine. It basically comes out of the 2006 Lebanon war, where after Israel was defeated by Hezbollah, they bombed the hell out of a suburb in Beirut called Da'iyah. And the intent there was to hurt the civilian population so badly that they'd either make Hezbollah stop fighting or make sure that Hezbollah never fought Israel again because they didn't want to be hurt that badly again. Well, it didn't work in 2006. It didn't work during Operation Protective Edge in 2014. It's definitely not working now. But their standard military doctrine, one of their pillars of their operational planning and the conducting of combat operations, is by definition the collective punishment of civilians, which is, of course, a war crime. So their entire military existence is kind of like a war crime in that way. So it's not surprising when you internalize like that's how they operate. We have 7 months of evidence like that's what they do because they're not primarily targeting Hamas. They're primarily targeting civilians. It's just not surprising. And at this point, it's very hard to argue that or believe that there were actually Hamas members in the refugee camps when you take in how they plan operations.
May I also say how this particular Dahiyya doctrine is absolutely vacuous from the get-go? I mean, even if it didn't work in Lebanon and this happened in a particular neighborhood in Beirut, and obviously it was like in a particularly isolated location where not everybody's livelihood was at stake, right? It didn't work then. Why the hell do they actually think it's going to work against the Palestinian people? I mean, the more you're constantly hitting them, the more you're sort of depriving them of the basic ability to live as dignified people, the more they're actually going to retaliate, because at this point they have absolutely nothing to do. And this is a collective issue that they have nowhere else to go. They have no other means to escape this. So it's either we fight or we die. This is sort of the outcome. They're not going to turn against Hamas. You're just merely creating the perfect conditions to create a revolutionary drive within a population. It's nonsensical.
It really is. They don't, and it's the polar opposite. It's not that U.S. doctrine and NATO doctrine is good, but it's interesting that it is the polar opposite of counterinsurgency doctrine by NATO standards. So NATO standards is like you need to make sure that people have employment, power, water, basic services, and can go to schools. And the best that you're hoping for is like, okay, they're not, because it's written from the occupier standpoint, obviously, right? It's U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine. So, but it's like, okay, the best we can hope for is that the people will not passively support the insurgency. They're not gonna support your occupiers. But the best you can get is like, okay, if we can just get them passive, not active at all in supporting either side. And the only way you can do that is by making sure that they have all these things. And the Israeli doctrine is the absolute opposite of that. And of course, it doesn't work. Of course they're going to they help Hamas, support Hamas, join Hamas. Who wouldn't?
And that's one thing that the Israeli propaganda machine never talks about. It's like we've killed X number of Hamas. It's like, okay, but they've also been recruiting at the same time in unprecedented numbers because of what you guys have been doing. It's like, oh, there's a lot of people on the fence. A lot of young boys being like, I don't know if I really want to do this. I have options. I can go be a baker. Oh, they destroyed my father's bake shop and my father and my family. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to join now.
Yeah, you're making the choice. You're making the choice real easy, because you're right.
You've killed my mom, my dad.
Most humans do not want to pick up a rifle and die violently fighting, industrial military forces. Most people do not want to do that. But you're giving them no choice. Of course not.
Yeah. So, and you know what? This is why this. I think Alina and I were texting last night about like how this really could be a turning point, this bombing of the refugee camp, just because there's so much imagery, just because it came after the ICJ ruling saying, hey, Israel, stop operations. And even though the ICJ doesn't necessarily have any coercive power, it's symbolically important on a number of reasons for which we've touched on in previous episodes. But I think after everything, this is really going to be like one of those iconic images, like the children running from napalm and during the Vietnam War.
Oh yeah, I mean, Alina, you nailed it. You called it a narcissistic temper tantrum, I think, or something along those lines. And I 100% agree. That's what it looks like. There's no operational or tactical reasoning behind doing something like that. It makes no sense.
What's interesting, I agree. And what's interesting now is to see what Joe Biden and the White House is going to come out and say. Because although they had set initially like the red line is we're not going to support a full ground invasion of Rafah because obviously it's a threat to the civilian population. Of course, then they tried to sort of blur the red lines a little bit following Biden's CNN interview. But now, I mean, I can see what Israel's going to say. Like, this was a targeted attack. It's not it was in a designated area that it was combat zone. This is how they're going to try. This is the semantics they're going to play with. But I'm interested to see at this point how the United States officials are going to try to maneuver their way out of this, because now we're talking about a direct attack on a refugee camp, killing how many dozens of people, hundreds injured. And they specifically said that they wouldn't support something that would bring about such a large a casualty in the Palestinian civilian population. So I'm interested to see how they're going to deal with it now.
Well, I think that's why we've been waiting on a response for like a while now. They have a war room set up in the White House, just being like, oh fuck, how do we spend this? And Matt Miller's probably crying in the bathroom, being like, I have to face the press. So. Yeah, so I'm not sure how they can do that. This entire 7 months has been one big highlight in Western hypocrisy. So, Yeah, they'll. I think you're correct. They'll be like, yeah, we're still waiting on the internal investigation. We condemn the killing and dropping of refugees and refugee camps. We're going to take a sterner approach, but we might still authorize weapons.
I was just saying, what does that mean? What does that mean, right? Another 2 weeks. Was it? Oh, we're gonna have a 2 week delay on the next bomb shipment. That's our stern approach, right? So far.
Yeah. So I don't think it will have. Personally, I'm going to make a prediction. I don't think it will change. It might change the talking points a little bit, but it will not change core U.S. policy towards Israel. However, it will get Israel closer to pariah statehood. Now, countries, we've just had 3 European countries recognize Palestinian statehood. And then, of course, keyboard warriors on the internet are like, who cares what 3 countries say? Who cares what they say about Palestinian statehood? It's like, well, then you don't really understand how this really
it matters.
System works.
It matters.
So. Yeah, and now oh yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No, I was just also going to say, beyond the fact that you got 3 EU states now, because obviously the European Union is supposed to be, I mean, it's a little lappy dog of the United States at this point, but let's just say it's part of the Western bubble. It's supposed to be an Israeli ally, and they still are to a certain extent. I mean, Joseph Borrell isn't out here supporting, and Joseph Borrell, again, he's basically the chief of the EU foreign policy. He's not out here supporting a 2-state solution because he cares about the Palestinians. He wants to preserve Israel. And he wants to establish some sort of stability in the Middle East that then the EU can exploit. But I find it interesting because now with the ICJ ruling as well, when you have all these countries within the EU that are slowly supporting the Palestinian cause and basically statehood, this is then going to be taken to, the ICJ ruling could be taken to the United Nations Security Council meeting, and it's going to be interesting to see what the United States is going to do and how this could be used as leverage as well to get Israel to either calm down. But if the United States vetoes anything, vetoes the ICJ ruling, what does this mean for the West as a whole? What does this mean for the rules-based order? I mean, we're going to start seeing cracks throughout the West as well, within the European Union, and also the relations between the European Union and the United States. And so it's going to be very interesting to observe.
Yeah, and this thing that happened last night, this massacre that happened last night, will be used as the emblematic incident to kind of spearhead any sort of attempt to push this through the UN Security Council. So, yeah, this isn't just going to go away, but they're going to try to make it go away because everything Israel does, every atrocity they commit, they're just like, uh-oh, that's bad PR. So then they do damage control. And what they're trying to do for damage control from last night is say they hit the terrorists were hiding in an UNRWA tent, an aid tent. And you made a comment, you made a post about this, Alina, on your Instagram earlier today about, the Israeli Knesset. Let me pull up an article.
Can I just want to chime in on what she just said, though, because I totally agree. And it's like, so they're acting like the rulings of the ICC, the ICJ won't matter, that these national recognition from 3 countries doesn't matter. And it's like, no, that's completely wrong. These are all steps down the road to pariah statehood. Right. And it's the exact same thing that happened between the U.S. and apartheid South Africa. The U.S. kept backing it as pieces, shifted, sanctions, people started treating them like a pariah state. And it took time. And the U.S. backed them almost to the very end as the state got, apartheid South Africa got increasingly violent against its own populations. So it's like, no, these are steps down a road. You're walking the exact same path that apartheid South Africa did. And you're going to end up where it ended up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree.
So, that's a great point. The Israeli damage control on all this to justify their actions, to avoid the sinking into the black hole of pariah statehood, they are now retroactively, and I'm sure people were up late last night drafting this bill, like a lot of aides, the Knesset to prepare bill designating UNRWA as a terror organization, terminating all relations. So the fact that this is just breaking news, 12 hours after this devastating attack on a refugee camp, is kind of like more just Israeli damage control. They commit an atrocity, then they try to spin it in a way that, makes it look justified. So according to All Israel News, which is more of a right-leaning, well, all Israeli news media is right, but yeah. Knesset member Malinowski and Beitenu party is advancing a bill intended to designate United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees as a terror organization, the Jerusalem Post reporting. The purpose of this bill is to declare UNRWA a terrorist organization for all intents and purposes, as well as order the termination of the relations and cooperation of the state of Israel with the agency, either directly or indirectly. So this hasn't passed yet. Israel has strongly criticized the UN organization throughout the ongoing war, obviously, because they're trying to ethnically cleanse everybody, and the primary aid agency is a hindrance to that. So if you guys recall, at least 12 UNRWA employees were connected to the terrorist attack on October 7th. That was never proved, but the accusation alone lodged by Israel was enough to defund it from Western backers. But now
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Can I just say something really? Every time the ICJ rules against them, every time there's an attack on UNRWA for something, before, right, a day after the ICJ ruling on the 26th of January, they had said that basically UNRWA employees had helped on the October 7th, and everybody should immediately stop funding UNRWA. Now we had the ICJ ruling again against Israel, and then now they're targeting the camps, the refugee camps, and they're going to criminalize UNRWA, and I think that they will obviously pass through their parliament. I think they'll vote in favor of, to be honest. But it's just very interesting that every time the ICJ says something, this is how Israel reacts.
Yeah, and no, this definitely will pass. The sponsor of the bill, Malinowski, says, quote, without a shadow of a doubt, UNRWA agency provided in the October 7th massacre that is a terrorist organization, that it is no different from the terrorist organization of Hamas. So they're complaining UNRWA as a appendage of Hamas. So in the most recent confirmation of its deep ties to Hamas, Army Radio, that's Israeli Army Radio, reported that the bodies of 4 hostages recently recovered by the IDF were found in a tunnel shaft under an UNRWA building in Jabalia. Okay, so the Army Radio says it, so it must be true. Yeah.
Also, even if it was true, so what? So I built a tunnel under something, so what? You know, like
that shows complicity. I mean, you have to be able. You have to do a whole thorough investigation. This is a massive institution with thousands of people working for it in Gaza, externally. You cannot just go criminalizing, rendering the entire institution as a terrorist organization. And we can get into that because it really triggers me when they start when they try to legalize certain things and just say, right, everybody who works for UNRWA, the organization, is terrorist. And therefore now it's a legitimate target. It's an actual legitimate military target. If that happens, if this bill goes through, which it will, it basically gives the green light to the Israeli military to target anybody, employees, or any of the facilities of UNRWA.
Yeah, and it's very transparent too. Dismantling UNRWA has been a political ambition of Israel, or the Zionist entity, for years now. This goes back decades. This is nothing new. So it's the fact that they're just trying to designate it a terrorist organization now is very transparent. But if you the same problem with the accusation of anti-Semitism. Now that everything's a terrorist organization, it actually kind of means nothing. And what is the term terrorist right now?
But it's also like, this is a UN organization. You're declaring that a UN organization is a terrorist organization. This is the kind of shit that, like, pardon my French, this is the kind of stuff that like Russia does. Right? No one does that. This is how they
blur the lines. Yeah. But this is how they blur the lines as well. Because, okay, so if UNRWA is a terrorist organization, so you're saying everything else that comes from the United Nations is also a terrorist organization, which would also include the ICJ, because the ICJ is also part of the United Nations as well. So, I mean, where do we draw the line as to what you're defining as terrorism? And much like you said, Greg, as well, I mean, this just goes to show the way that they're just playing on the semantics. I mean, the subterfuge here of, well, this is, UNRWA is a terrorist organization. Based on what definitions? This is what I'm trying to say. That's why I said in one of our former podcasts, there's no international legal definition. It doesn't exist as to what a terrorist organization is. It's purely subjective. And it just goes to show that it's a political trope that is used, and it's abused, and it lacks any sort of context and legitimacy. And this is what it shows, because now we're just like, anybody that we don't like is terrorist, and that's it. We're codifying it. It's a bill, therefore it's legal. And that's what the law says, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like they said earlier, right? Like, terrorist attack on IDF soldiers. Like, if you're attacking military, that's not a terrorist attack. So, you know, again, to what you just said, it's their definition is anyone who's against us. I think declaring a UN organization a terrorist organization is really, really effing wild.
Yeah, it's also not really a sustainable narrative. People are going to challenge that, and if they challenge that, they're going to challenge any other time you use the word terrorist. It's like a boy who cried wolf proverb says, you know. So, yeah.
Okay. It also undermines it. Actually, what I like about this situation, what I find entertaining, is that by engaging in this sort of juvenile behavior, is that they're sort of showing the world that the term terrorism doesn't mean anything. They are sort of ridding it of its meaning completely, which is sort of a good thing in a way. Because before, let's just say before October 7th, if you heard the word terrorism, for a lot of people, especially the average person, they would take it to mean something if you don't have the context, let's say, to understand these things. But now, with all this discussion of terrorism that has been overly used and now overly saturated in the media with regards to the Palestinian resistance, and now with regards to the United Nations institutions itself, they've completely depleted the concept of its, alleged meaning, in the same way that they've done the same thing with the term anti-Semitism as well. So, thanks for that, Israel.
Yeah, and I do anticipate the strike that happened last night as being one of those shock images that will be emblematic, just like some of those pictures out of the Vietnam War, where it's just another instance that's going to turn more people against it, or at least get people to question it. It's going to be brought up in the UN General Assembly. It's not going away anytime soon. The White House has established a war room just to figure out how to spin this thing and how to respond to it, because it is going to be that damaging. Now, the final point that we wanted to breaking news adjacent to this strike was earlier today. The Israeli and Egyptian militaries got into an exchange of gunfire in Rafah, or on the Rafah border. Let me pull up this article real quick. Stop screen. Sorry. Tech is not my strong suit. So 1 second. Okay, yeah. So basically, the Israeli and Egyptian troops exchanged fire at Rafah crossing. Obviously, tensions are high as there's an assault on Rafah. We know that the Egyptians have created a buffer zone in between Gaza and the Sinai, specifically so this wouldn't happen. So Israeli media reported on the 27th, that's today, that Israeli forces killed at least one Egyptian soldier in an exchange of fire. Channel 14 News, which is an Israeli outlet, it's not something I recommend watching for your own sanity, fired on an Israeli truck at the Rafah crossing, indicated that the Israeli army soldiers responded to this with gunfire. We're probably never going to really know the truth of what happened. Mariv, which is another far-right magazine in Israel, reported that an Egyptian soldier was killed, et cetera, et cetera. So they basically are saying, the Hebrew media, is that Egypt, by firing on an Israeli truck, have breached the 1979 Camp David peace accords, which is entirely hypocritical because Israel occupying the Philadelphia corridor and controlling southern Rafah and the Rafah crossing is a breach of the Camp David accords. So exactly. we were talking about how we don't really know what's going on. You mentioned, Alina, that there was probably a gag order going on, even though an investigation is going to happen into this. We're probably not going to really know what happens externally.
No, it's not. But do you know what it is? And we obviously were discussing this earlier. This is very emblematic of it's like a snippet of what could happen if Israel tries to expel Palestinians into the Egyptian territories. This is how fast things could easily extend into a more regional war, even between Egyptians, or it could even be paramilitary units and Israel. Now, this is more speculative, by the way. I've read in some media outlets that were coming out of Egypt, this is speculation, that this was some Egyptian soldiers that were so horrified by the events of last night that it was sort of like a rogue a form of retaliation for the attacks on Rafah yesterday. Obviously, these were not verified, but this is some of the reports that I read. But again, this is very suggestive of how the population in Egypt feels. What would happen if this persistent operation in Rafah persists? And yeah, it's not going to end very well.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't see this one incident escalating into anything because
No.
Egypt is still a player on a ceasefire deal with between Israel and Hamas, and yeah, that's the priority for the United States at this point. I just making this go away, making this stop, and getting their rogue actor back under control. And Egypt's important to that whole process, so I don't expect anything to come of this. At least this one incident.
Oh yeah, at least no. But that's the thing that there was the key word was this is contingent to Israel being sort of reined back by the United States and this sort of eventually coming to a halt. But if Israel continues on the trajectory that it's on and it continues to massacres in Rafah and there isn't an end to this inside, I'm starting to wonder what could actually happen. Because yes, right now Egypt does not want a war to extend to its territory. It doesn't want one. It doesn't need one. But Israel just seems to be acting completely chaotic. And sometimes even I question whether our more rational approach to things is actually going to pan out that way, because they're completely irrational.
Yeah, I mean, one of the flaws, the biggest flaws in my analyses of this situation over the past 6 or 7 months has been assuming that, Israel was still in some capacity a rational actor. Not only that, but Egypt won't tolerate an influx of refugees from Rafah into the Sinai. For a whole number of reasons. The Bedouin, their own failing economy. It's just a mess too. So
that's why I said it would be a declaration of war if that happened. And that's why I said this would be a snippet of what could happen if Israel continues and tries to push Palestinians into Egypt. This is just a small snippet of what would happen.
Yeah. So that's the Rafah. So we talked about the strike on the camp and their BS safe zone protocols. They're equally BS targeting of high value Hamas targets. They designated UNRWA as a terrorist organization, or they will, because I definitely think that bill is going to pass. And then what's important about the Israel gunfire exchange in Rafah and what it foreshadows for the future. I think those are the main points. I think there's going to be a legal action over this within the UN General Assembly and the ICJ and stuff, but I think that's where we are right now. This isn't just going to go away. Again, interested to see what the Biden administration is going to say about it, but I don't expect them to change their rhetorical position or policy position at all. So any final thoughts before we close out?
I was just going to say, it's also very important to see, interesting to see how they're going to respond if this bill goes through, where they're basically designating UNRWA as a terrorist organization. I would love to see what the United States is going to say about basically an UN institution being labeled as terrorist, which is, and like we've said many times on this podcast, the United Nations was created by the US. So it's going to be very interesting to see their take on that as well.
Yeah, and what are they going to do with the hundreds of UN personnel that are on the ground there as part of that organization, right? I forgot what the exact total was now, but yeah. Difficult political position the Biden administration has allowed itself to get into. So I'm
putting it mildly.
Yeah, I know. I'm not. I guess I will enjoy watching them squirm. And Matt Miller cry in the bathroom when he has to try and spin this later today. So, yeah, I think that's it for right now. Unless something insane happens, we might be gone for a couple days. But appreciate you guys for listening in, and we'll see you next time. Have as good a one as you can under the circumstances. Cheers, and that's it.